Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TheMsTexasShow. This is the show where we highlight our amazing survivors from sexual assault, sex trafficking, domestic violence. We also invite our community leaders to share their resources. Under the segment Military Time, we partner with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. And we invite our veterans as well as military to share their experience during and after their service. We also have a segment, Beauty for Ashes. This is a segment where we invite our beauty pageant, whether they're nominees or winners, artists, whether they're dancers, musicians, actors. But last but not least, our ambassadors who are survivors from those crimes and who are now doing amazing work to come on the show and share their platforms and the impact that they're making in their communities. If you would like to be a guest on the show, you can email us on missusatexas@gmail.com. It is MSUSA Texas. You can also direct message us through Facebook with the same name, Miss USA Texas. This show is sponsored by Hope PYX Global. Hope PYX Global is a nonprofit organization support victims, survivors from all backgrounds from these crimes. Now, without further ado, I'm so excited to have our special guest today, Miss Barbara Joy Hansen. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Miss Texas.
Oh my God, Barbara, you're so
delight.
awesome. Yes, I spent a lot of time reading your bio, and I ended up highlighting it because you have achieved so much, and I love what you do. I love what you use, your unfortunate story in the past, but now, most importantly, bring hope to people. And I know that we talked earlier, you're gonna share with us what you're doing with the humanitarian projects and everything, but I'm gonna do like a short introduction of Barbara, and then we're gonna let her tell us her story. So Barbara's story was the first one that was mentioned in the Rain newsletter, and is in the NASCAR newsletter as well. And for those of you who does not know, RAIN is the National Sexual Assault Organization. And she is a pastor's daughter survivor of various crimes resulting from complex PTSD with a redemption story after confronting and facing one of her perpetrators. She has had many media interviews as well as being on the Dr. Oz show with 20 survivors of sexual assault and sexual harassment. She truly has an inspirational miracle story of redemption to share with you after raising above childhood incest between age 2 and 8, as well as clergy sexual assault at the age between 11 and 12, rape, pornography, infidelities. Oh my God, so many more. And she has also been on CBN Asia in the 4 minutes documentary that is on the 700 Club show in the Philippines, and which I believe that's related to the humanitarian project that she's doing. And she is also the co-host for NASCAR Stop Child Abuse Now, the SCAN talk show. I believe I was a guest on there too, and I'm actually a NASCAR ambassador. So thank you so much for what you do. She, for those who are listening in, she's on every second Thursday of every month. And look up for Bobby Joy, and that's her show host name. Her story has also been published in about 23 magazines and newspapers. And she has also helped so many different people. For instance, Bernice is a former addict and a high-class call girl. And now she is speaking around the world to raise awareness and bring hope. And this is awesome. Oh my God, the list goes on and on. I think I'm gonna pass the mic to Barbara now and let you tell us about a little bit, fill us in about more about what you're doing and how did this all get started.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for doing what you're doing to help me get heard. God is using me to disturb those who have been complacent and to restore those that have been outcasts. And I once saw myself as an outcast. I no longer see myself as an outcast. I'm a victorious survivor, have risen above the generational curses with my voice. I've come out of the ashes. But let me tell you a little bit about what I went through. I was raised in a wonderful faith-based, godly home with a mom and dad that absolutely adored me. I have one brother 2 years older. And so I was in a safe place. I felt safe with my dad. He was a clergy, but he always took time for me. But the incest began at age 2 to 8 with a grandfather that took me out for rides. He was always out of ice cream. I'm sure he ate it up before he took me out. I was 2 years old, so I was just a baby. He also entered my bath time when nobody was in the house, when nobody was around, to view me. And in the car at age 2 to 8, he uncovered himself, unzipped his pants, and wanted me to touch him. And I freaked out. I didn't understand any of it. And I went over by the door and tried to jump out of the car. Repeatedly, he did this. As a child, I was shy, quiet, introverted, had no words to tell what happened to me. For decades, I wanted to, but I couldn't. And as an adult, I recognized and realized that I'm sure he did it to my mother as well. And because my cousins were violated by him, I had 2 female cousins that want nothing to do with me now because of my work. And because I exposed it at my uncle's funeral, who was a pedophile, my mother's brother. So the generational curse was passed on. At age 5, I woke up in the middle of the night screaming hysterically, and my mother had to come in and comfort me and rock me back to sleep. And she was scared to see me so frightened, but it was the nightmares that I was having. At age 8, I shut down from my grandfather and said, okay, I'm not going to go to his home and have him hug me hello or goodbye anymore. And that worked. Well, then at age 11, I went to a youth camp, a Christian youth camp in New York State, where a 27-year-old clergy violated me again in the water, in the mission house. He reeled us up to the top room where he looked out of the window and could see us kids with candy and comic books. And in those days, back, in the 1950s and 60s, comic books and candy were enticing for a child. So he singled me out as if picking the sweetest, ripest oranges at the supermarket. And these details are still fresh in my memory, even though they happened long ago. My parents trusted everybody at that camp and allowed me to wander around and walk around, and all the preachers' kids and missionaries' kids did as well. But as a pre-adolescent teenager, sexual abuse physically, emotionally, and spiritually shut me down. And I say physically because I was undernourished. I looked anorexic. There's a picture of me in my book, and I hate the picture of me. All the signs were there in my pictures. And I didn't like myself. I didn't like how I looked. I had to stuff my bras with Kleenex when my girlfriend was developed. I hadn't started my menstrual cycle. So at age 16, my mother took me to the doctors. Nobody asked me anything about what I had gone through, and I couldn't tell them at that point. So victims of sexual abuse are literally stuck in a time frame of physical abuse as well. So then as I grew into adulthood, I felt as if a wrecking ball came down on my head and shattered me in a million pieces all over the road, like Humpty Dumpty scattered. And I didn't know what to do. When we got married, my husband and me, I couldn't conceive a child. So it physically stopped my body from producing a baby. So we adopted our firstborn son, which I wrote about in my book, a chapter in my book. And it says, as I'm speaking about my book, I'll hold it up. Can you see it?
Yes, listen to the cry
Of the child.
of the child. Yes.
The deafening silence of sexual abuse. And there's a picture of the garbage heap with the baby tossed, the baby crying, a toy airplane, a baby carriage. And on the top is a flower pot with a rose. Now, the only thing in color on my book is the rose. And that is me. I'm blossoming, I'm blooming, I'm no longer shamed. Shame says I did something wrong. Blame says something's wrong with me. And for a long time, I blamed myself. I thought I deserved this. And when I met my husband, we were in college. He came on to me sexually. And for a long time, I couldn't say the word rape. It wasn't a violent rape. I was in love with him. We're still married, happily married. But that took me a long time to work through. Rape no means no, you know, and I wanted to remain a virgin. And so that affected me. So I suffered greatly with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but PTSD is like amnesia. You literally can't recall. And the more trauma you go through, the deeper and deeper and deeper it goes. It creates an invisible wound around the traumatic events. And it becomes, like you said, crime. I'm glad you used that word, because all these things I've gone through, and perhaps you have, are crimes. Trauma as a child, an adult, and it could be a car accident. It could be a child running out in the street and getting killed. It could be a fire or a death. So if you've been re-exposed again and again, that trauma goes deeper into your psyche, into your brain, until you can recall it and bring it up and then understand it. So my life was shattered. It was, for a long time, I thought I had the Leave It to Beaver family. I thought it was a Kodak picture family, because I did have probably was good I didn't remember it all, because you know, my girlfriend and I, who went through abuse as well, she did. I wrote a chapter about Judy in my book. Her brother had a skeleton key to her room. And so she's one person I did tell. And when I told my cousins and they told me my uncle also abused them and I avoided his touches, I realized, well, I didn't realize, I couldn't tell anybody except my girlfriend and my cousins. So for 38 years, I kept it under wraps. The effects produce guilt, shame, and then when you start telling as an adult, people tell you, oh, you shouldn't be talking about that. That happened to you a long time ago. Well, you better be sure I am now, because I couldn't talk about it for 38 years. So don't put shame on me and blame on me. It produces sadness. I was anxious, withdrawn, fear, inability to trust. It creates isolation and manipulation and memory blocks. In school, I studied for tests, but I couldn't recall the facts and figures, because when you've gone through this, you shove it. So for a long time, and I don't think teachers understand. I had a teacher call my dad when I was growing up in Texas, when he had a church in Texas, and blame me because I couldn't understand some of the English things that she had in class. And it was because of the post-traumatic stress disorder. My father didn't know. I hadn't told my parents. So it's an emotional and a mental illness, a mental death, mental sickness, double sickness, where you feel all alone. and you're empty. And you become a dysfunctional family where you're told, don't tell, don't feel, don't share, don't trust, don't get close, don't come out of hiding, and don't let anybody ever know what you went through in this family. So that's why I shut down for all those years.
Wow. I am so proud of you, Barbara, for, that you are standing up for yourself and for shaking off the shame and the blame. Just like I tell a lot of my survivor warrior sisters and brothers, I tell them that, don't let them label you, because
Right.
what happened to you is unfortunate, but that's not what you wanted to happen to you. Therefore, don't let other people's mistake label you, and let yourself shake off the ashes. And I love that, you have the support group Beauty Out of Ashes. It's truly, you are the beauty out of the ashes, just like the rose on the book. Oh my God,
Yes.
I can really feel that. And you talk about so many things that I can relate to, I can understand completely. You were talking about, first of all, the physical damage. In addition to, an adult getting those PTSD could have physical damage, not to mention you were a child. You were just 2 years old at the time when everything started. And the science, that terms ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, that is not a joke. And people don't understand. They feel like, okay, just, man up, woman up. No, you can't do that, because this is
No.
the damage that actually take place in your physical body. I forgot the name of, actually, she's a Christian doctor, medical doctor. And I remember reading one of her books, and she actually has taken x-rays of the brain. And
Wow.
yes, and when a person is depressed, there's like a cloud over the brain. So it's not just like, people think, well, you just eat some candy and stop crying, and they shove things back into you. And that's just like you said, you kept silent for so many years, and that's what the damage was done to you internally. And I really applaud you to decide finally that, you know what, I'm gonna speak up, because this is the right thing to do. I'm just like so proud of you for what you have done. So tell us more about, to our audience who are not understanding of the situation. We talked about the physical damage, and you were talking about it's like amnesia, it stacks up. I remember talking to physicians, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and they were like, yes, it just depends on the frequency of how many times it happened to you, the severities of each incident, and how close they are to each other. But I always tell people that, even though this is not doctor's advice, from my experience and also working with people in this field, that I have learned that this is something is never going to go away, but it's something that we learn to cope with. So please share with our audience, what these damages are and how did you cope with them?
Well, people think that sexual abuse is about sex. It's not. Sexual abuse can be defined as any sexual activity, verbal, visual, physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, exploiting a person in order to meet the other person's emotional and sexual needs, leading to power and control. So incest is one of the secrets that holds its victims in the tightest of chains, that leads to so much confusion and fear and creates a dungeon of which there seems to be no escape. So long after the abuse is over, if you don't start talking about it and uncovering that bandage and letting the pus come out and start understanding what you went through and why you went through it, which I do go into great detail in my book, How to Recover from It. But for me, what I want to give you hope, because that's what I'm about. Pandora's box opened in October 1998. One of our sons had gotten married. My elderly parents were in the home with us. Everybody else was gone. And my mother and I turned down Oprah. Well, you know, she's talked about it somewhat, and this was a show called Family Secrets. We watched it together, and I had not told my mother yet. I had told my father, but he told me to keep it under wraps. It's going to kill her. Don't tell her. And I couldn't understand that. Here, I got violated. Why can't I tell mom? But I thought I told the right person, my father being a clergy. But back in the day in seminary, you weren't taught and you weren't told, and they didn't have courses about sexual assault and domestic violence in seminary. So the show went off, and I was bringing in addicts. My addiction was with codependency with junkies, with male heroin addict that we took in and out over an eight-year period. That was a very dangerous thing for me to do as a woman with another man. But my marriage was broken. It was dead, and I didn't know it. And I rescued. And a lot of women who have gone through this are rescuers. And I've spoken to the U.S. military on sexual assault because rape survivors can help military victims of abuse and assault. And when I spoke to the U.S. Army in Natick, Massachusetts, they bought 90 some books and gave them out to all the soldiers. They had me speak in the morning, in the afternoon, and paid me pretty good money to speak to them. And we had questions and answers at the end of my PowerPoint presentation, rescuing the prisoner when the prisoner is you. And that was my PowerPoint. So when the show was over, we turned it off, and I thought, why can't I tell my mother? The secret is plaguing me. It's just destroying me. And that summer, I had told both of my parents about the clergy at the Bible camp molesting. I've got to tell her, I can't, but the roof blew off, let's say. And I started spewing it out, saying, Daddy, because he was saying, why are you bringing in addicts? You don't run a safe place. You don't have a addiction certificate, or you're not a counselor. No, but the School of Hard Knocks and things that we've gone through teaches us if we're interested in learning about ourselves and soaking in the knowledge and the information. So I said, Daddy, I know without a doubt my mother is a victim, and the volcano was spewing, and my mother came down in the middle, my daddy and me. I don't want to say arguing, but it was all coming out. And my father said, maybe you better tell her now. Well, I couldn't believe it. I ran downstairs, grabbed my husband's arm, pulled him upstairs. We sat at the kitchen table, and I started weeping. And I said, Mama, Grandpa did this to me, and I know you were victimized by him as well. My father put his hand on my mother's arm and said, no, 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 it didn't happen to you. And he stopped her. She said, honey, yes, he did it to me too, when I was a very young child. And she crawled in bed with me the next day and started telling me some of the things that had happened to her and things he did. And suddenly it was coming to place. I was getting hope. I was starting to feel, okay, I'm being heard, I'm being listened to. And if you don't understand what I've gone through, you better hear my voice and listen to the importance in the healing of my family. And as I began to tell my mother that not only was I a victim, but she and my cousins were as well, she said, why, oh, why didn't you tell me years ago? Fear chokes the garden. It chokes your soul. It chokes and it becomes weeds in your garden. So as my fear was released from the garden of my life, now it could bloom and become the beautiful garden that it is now, beauty out of ashes. And in my support group that I teach, I hand out masks. And on the mask, on the one side, it says, who am I? Am I a victim? And all the words on this poster, I won the poster presentation at International Violence and Abuse and Trauma Conference in San Diego, California. And this particular mask I pass out in my support group that I teach, Beauty Out of Ashes. And on one side it says victim. And I put the words victim, cocoon, enables, no identity, fear, chains, guilt, shackled, hostage, despair. These are the words that I thought about myself. And then in the course, I hand out a blank mask that says, who am I? How do others see me? Well, others saw me as butterfly, beautiful, gentle, release, peace, happy. You're an author, you have purpose. So you see yourself completely different than others see you. The following year, I went back to the International Violence, Abuse, and Trauma Conference, and I passed out this poster. 1,550 people voted in the poster. And this one was domestic violence and sexual assault, which says, international author, domestic violence and sexual assault, no tolerance for abuse. And on the bottom, I say, give up your violence and oppression and do what is just and right, Ezekiel 45:9. And in the Beauty Out of Ashes verse, it comes from Isaiah 61:3. God will bring beauty out of ashes and a garment of praise rather than a spirit of despair. So now I have hope. I'm giving back constantly. Every single book I sell helps with orphans that have been trafficked in the Philippines, in the Father's House Orphanage. And we give clothes, and we've bought dressers for these kids and shoes and taken them to the market and bought them food and games and things. So if you've been abused, you need to say, stop. I no longer tolerate abuse of any kind. So my website is listentothecry.org. All my TV shows and my interviews are on my website. You can get my book from me by calling me on my phone number at home, 508-473-1280. And the reason I'm getting my number out and my website out is because every book we sell, they're $20 with shipping, and it doesn't include shipping and handling. In the US, it's about $4.50 for shipping and handling, but the book is $20. And if it's in a foreign country, we can ship that, but we have to have it weighed. The reason I'm giving my information, my phone number, is because every book we sell helps these kids that have been trafficked. And you and I both know that not only in other countries like the Philippines and China and Japan and various countries, the U.S. State Department estimates that between 600 and 800,000 victims are trafficked every single year by criminals. They're bought and sold all ages, and these kids don't have a clue. They think they're going to get a job, and they go into illegal prostitution with a pimp that pimps them with trafficking. So I've become knowledgeable with that because I reached out to the orphans in the Philippines. I spoke in 23 churches in the jungle, in the mountains, in the villages, and at funerals. And ISIS was watching our every move. And when I went to the Philippines, we have 3 adult sons, and we brought them over and told them what we were going to do. And I said, we may go in the middle of the night and rescue some of these kids that run away, but there's steps and process that we have to go through. And one of our sons was very concerned, and he said, Mom, I'm scared for your safety, for your welfare, which I understood, but I really didn't, because I asked the missionary, okay, what do I tell him? And he said, Barb, when we all know the Lord and we've got faith, deep faith, which you have, and he had read my book, and he begged me to come over and give the pastors and clergy and pastors' wives in the seminary and the school that he is in the Philippines, Barner Christian Academy we worked at. He said, you have guardian angels. And when you go, and ISIS, the drug lords all know us. And when they see you coming, they run, because your guardian angels protect you, and they're surrounding you, and they're around you. And when they see the angels, they run. And that was unbelievable that
Amen.
I could give that to my son, to tell him, don't worry about me. God's going to protect me. And he did. We were there 2 months.
You truly have the guardian angels, like you say, from beautiful ashes and from like you were talking about breaking the generational curses and all of these. And, you couldn't have done this alone. And you have done this with all the supporters, but most importantly, the higher God who has been
Yes,
there for
amen.
you.
This isn't a house. And it's definitely not a home. It's a prison. The shackles may be invisible, but they are still very real.
What did you say to me? You think you can hide from me?
We all wonder why the victims of abuse just don't leave. It's simple, really. You can't leave if you don't have a place to go. If you're a victim of abuse, Hope Pigs Global is here to help. Call 1-800-799-SAFE this instant. The end of abuse starts here.
Okay.
All right, so we're back, and we've had some technical difficulties, and this is not the first time we have technical difficulties nowadays with COVID and all the internet, but I really believe that the work we're doing fighting sex trafficking, sexual assault is something that the devil is fighting really hard against. So I'm so glad and so proud of you, Barbara, for what you're doing. And, we're talking about in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, that last week, in fact, in San Diego, California, and the congratulations again for winning the award at the conference about the mask and everything. I really love the message that was on the mask and the hope that you're bringing to the audience. And that's what the show is all about, to bring hope, love, unity, and a safe environment to, for all the survivors, victims, and their supporters to
Yes.
to heal on this journey together. Amen.
Amen.
So this is awesome. Awesome. Thank you for what you do. In the Philippines, I know that in the interview, I have been invited to talking about military and sexual assault. And you've mentioned that the U.S. government have estimated about 600 to 800,000. And back in the time that the Subic Bay in the Philippines was where the U.S. military was, and therefore all the children there are sex trafficked. And, so I really give you applause for what you do. And for the audience that if you haven't heard about the link, we're going to put the book link below so that you can help support Barbara for her initiatives and working on the humanitarian project. That is wonderful. Thank you so much. And Barbara, you talked about guilt. You talked about shame. You talked about blame. And we talked about earlier, like shaking it off, whether they are a victim, whether they're a survivor. And to be honest, you mentioned like back in the days in the seminary school, they don't really teach you about trauma informed. So like, for the audience that are listening, what advices would you give to those who are victim survivors? What advices would you give to those who are supporters? I'm sure they care, they wanted to help. How can they help?
I go into a lot of answers and awareness in my book. So first of all, you can get a copy of my book, Listen to the Cry of the Child. Order it from us at Bobby Joy Hansen at juno.com, BOBBIEJOYHANSEN at juno.com. And there's a whole lot of information and awareness in my book. But I wanted to mention about grieving. When I went through a sex abuse case, and this was unbelievable that I actually went back to my denomination of my childhood was the Christian and Missionary Alliance denomination. I went back to the campgrounds in 1998 and saw a best friend that I hadn't seen in 27 years. She didn't have the courage to come back because she had been violated by the same pastor at the camp. She was a counselor at the camp, and he did the same things to her and maybe more. And she and I, and there were 4 of us that actually faced the perpetrator in 1999. The following year after I saw her, we were flown to Florida to face him. I didn't know he was still alive. I didn't expect to ever see the man, one of the perpetrators that had violated me again. But the Christian Missionary Alliance set up a committee of discipline for him with a well-known psychiatrist, and a disciplinary committee for him, and a restoration committee for me and the other 3 women. Now, one of them was one of my best friends. We still are best friends. Every year we go back to the campgrounds. We have a cottage there and I see him. But I wanted to tell you that the year before my case was heard with a sex abuse case in Florida, and this perpetrator was brought into the room, and I courageously told my story for 45 minutes with a psychologist sitting next to me and the sex offender to his right and the clergy at this big table. And I don't think that the clergy had ever gone through anything like this before. 1 year prior to my case, there were 30-some adult missionary kids that had gone through sexual assault at the Mama Africa School Alliance Academy. And this was back in the 1950s and 60s. And missionary counselors and staff did sexual things and other things to these kids. And these little children were flown to the jungle, to the Mama Alliance Academy to do the work of Christ. And I could never do that. I could never give my child away when these children were like 4, 5, 6 years old, so that I could preach the gospel to people in Africa or any other country. These children were blessed and given to me by God, and I am the mother and my husband was the father. But in those days, they were flown by missionary aviation to do God's work and put them in a boarding school. There were no phone, no cell phones, no emails. They couldn't call their mama or daddy when they were lonesome or sad or unhappy. And all this abuse was going on. So 1 year prior to my telling the denomination, and a committee was set up for these adult kids. Some of them have left the church. Some of them have become gay and lesbian. Some of them have denied things and isolated. And I was shocked that here I am telling 1 year later, and they set up this committee for me. And they also we have a magazine called Alliance Life, and they put an apology letter in the magazine to apologize to victims of all kinds of abuse, if they'd been abused. But I want to say that the Christian Missionary Alliance is the first denomination that not only recognized abuse, but realized they made a big mistake. They didn't listen. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't acknowledge it until we told. And they set up a separate committee to hear our case and hear these kids. And they will never sacrifice for the sake of the gospel, the little ones. Jesus said, bring the little ones to me, suffer them not, and or a millstone be cast upon the pedophile's neck and be thrown into the sea. So they have accomplished their mission. And you ask what we can do. In each denomination, they need to have teaching. So my videos have gone into the Alliance Academy. I have been in the magazine in Alliance Life. When I went to the Philippines, they put my story in there. I've been published in many magazines, like you said, and Alliance Life was one of them. Prison Living magazine is another one. Christian Motorcyclist is another one. My husband and I ride with Christian Motorcyclists Association. And so anytime we can get heard and get our story out, when I first published my book, and it's in its third publication, I called every reporter I could, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald. I wanted to get heard. I wanted to get out there. So the more we tell, the more we get our stories heard, and the more shows we go on. And I want to thank you and praise God for having you have me on here today, tell my testimony. It's a testimony of hope and healing. And National Abuse Survivors, NASCA, NAASCA, Adult Survivors of Sexual Assault, has been behind me as well. And I'm on every second Tuesday of the month. So you can go on their website. It's a NASCA Blog Talk Radio podcast, and you can call the show and get answers and awareness on not only when I'm on, but they're on 7 nights a week. So I wanted to go back to the grieving. I didn't grieve. I didn't know what grieving meant. I didn't know how to grieve. When I faced this clergy and told him what he had done to me, I said to him, well, he said to me first, I don't know if you can find it in your heart to forgive me. And that was the only admission that the clergy that had interviewed him with a psychologist, that was his only admission. And for me, it was enough. He said, I don't know if you can find it in your heart to forgive me. And I said, forgive you. But now I was already teaching my Beauty Out of Ashes support group with addicts. And I said, of course I forgive you, but you better run into recovery and acknowledge what happened and acknowledge all these hundreds of kids you've molested. He was moved from campground to campground to campground as a youth pastor. And so 7 weeks after I faced him in the sex abuse case, after I forgave him, and I don't tell people they have to forgive, they need to forgive, because that's up to you, whether you forgive the perpetrator or not. Or you can burn a letter, you can write them a letter and thrust it in the door and run away, or you can mail it to them or burn it or whatever. But I chose, when he asked me if I could forgive him, I chose to forgive. And I am so happy that I did that, because 7 weeks after I faced this man, I got a phone call from the head of the committee. He fell down the stairs and broke his back and died. Had I not chosen to forgive him, I couldn't have written my book. I wouldn't be healed. I wouldn't have grieved. And grieve I did as I wrote my book. The grieving process brings you out of the valley of the shadow of death. Sexual assault is a death-like experience. It's a dark night of the soul. No one can fully comprehend or understand except another who's gone through this valley and come out and come higher and had a vision and a calling. And God has a calling on my life, a huge calling. Do you think I want to talk about this? Absolutely not. But it's something I must do because God has called me into it. And it's like death knocking at your door, sometimes unexpected, other times expected. Unless you grieve all your losses, you'll end up lost forever, locked in a prison with no walls and no corpses. And in writing my book, I started grieving and grieving and grieving. And until it was written, I wrote my book in a week. 1 week it was written, and it poured out and poured out. I had it all in journals. I couldn't look at those journals for 38 years. I was afraid that I would die and somebody would find those journals. So in God's perfect timing, he always will time it in the correct way that it should come out. I began grieving all those losses of my childhood, loss of incest, loss of pre-adolescence, loss of my childhood, loss of being assaulted by this clergy, loss of my marriage being dead because of infertility and infidelity and pornography coming in. And I speak directly to men because men need to hear my story as well. if you don't think anybody's watching you and you go on your internet and you look at pornography and then your child sees it or your teenager sees the pornographic magazines, God sees. And it's disrespecting your significant other or your spouse or your girlfriend. And so I now am an advocate and an authority, and I am so blessed to be able to tell my inspirational story of hope all over the world. I've been to prison conferences. We've gone to Bridgewater State Penitentiary to speak to sex offenders for 6 years, gone in chapel, spoke right to the men that have been sexually molested and gotten into pornography. And there was a man in our church that is in prison now, and he molested 7 in his family, 7 of his kids, and he's in there now. And I am an authoritative woman of God because I've gone through these things, and I never even thought I had a testimony growing up. I thought, well, what do I have to say? I got saved when I was 5 years old. My daddy led me to faith in Jesus. But Jesus wasn't Lord of my life. He wasn't Lord of our marriage. He wasn't in my marriage at that time because I was sick inside. And as I let go of this heroin drug dealer that we took in and out of our home over an 8-year period and let go, and he was sick, he hadn't healed, even though he was a Christian, he was a believer in Jesus, I wasn't whole. I had to let go and let God and allow God to do the work in me that needed to be done. So his call on my life, I kind of denied it for a while. It was like the sound of a distant drum with a high price to this call, much persecution, much persecution. I've been criticized, I've been ostracized, but it was a choice. I listened to God. I had to listen to his voice. I either was silenced and victimized again, or I listened to the voice of God. And he has taught me to listen and depend on him and him alone, and listen for his still small voice where he prepared me for his call. My earthly training has come at a cost, but I don't listen to people anymore about that. I'm not a person that listens to criticism anymore. I listen to him, because when he tells you to do something, it's costly, but it's for a purpose. It's for a much greater purpose than we ever thought.
Wow. I feel like breaking down myself for, really, yeah, kind of really emotional. I think, in some, it's just like what you said, let go and let God. And
that's hard to do.
Yeah. and it is hard to do, about the forgiveness and everything. And that's why people often say, like, sometimes forgiveness is not for the other person, but it is for yourself.
It's for you to let that ember of hatred go. I prematurely forgave. I forgave my husband way too quick. If you don't grieve, and if he doesn't own up, that's a huge step. If he didn't own up to what he did, and he did, he would go to prison conferences with me and come out of a workshop with a workbook, and he heard this man speak about sexual addictions that had been molested. So he heard part of my story and part of his as well on pornography and things. He brought home the workbook. He brought home books. He didn't want to read them. I said, no, but I do. I want to know why you did what you did. What I realize about my husband now, and we can talk about anything, is that he comforted himself with women. You can anesthetize yourself with drugs, alcohol, sex addictions, pornography, codependency like I did. That is a cop-out to owning up and realizing I need to come clean with my secrets. So when I was writing my book, when I started to process the fact that I was going back to these journals and look at them for the first time in 38 years, I asked my husband, I said, honey, I'm going to start writing my book tomorrow. I quit my nanny job. For 12 years, I was a nanny, and the kids loved me and I loved them, but I knew that wasn't my purpose. And I said, honey, I'm going to start writing my book tomorrow. Do I have your permission to write about the infidelity in my book? So in my book, I wrote a chapter called Beyond Betrayal. So if you've gone through infidelity or any of these sexual sins in your life, there's so much hope that God can use every single thing if you give it back to him, if you give it back to others. But you've got to heal first. You can't go out and heal others until you heal that wounded child and that wounded adult.
Well, there's definitely hope in the healing. And as you said, that's what you promote. And that is something that I promote as well. And, you know, as we were setting up the interview, I met your lovely husband, and he's so supportive of what you do.
He is.
I'm really happy for you, and you certainly have the success story to share. You know, we are human beings, we all sin, but it's
Right.
really a matter of, you know, how we come to realization of repentment, and then how you have the healing process, and eventually in a place where you can forgive. And this is just like, this is beautiful to see, you know, the happy and the hope, and that there's the light at the end of the tunnel. I just can't begin to say enough thank you for everything that you have done. And like I said, I was just paused because I was, you know, I have tears and I'm waiting, just like not letting it come out when I hear what you said of the things that you have been through. And I can completely understand, you know, it is not fun. You talked about, you know, how many people wanted you, including your dad, with no disrespect, but he did tell you not to tell your mother. And even when your mother said that, and he wanted to tell your mother to tell you no. And there were so many other people in the way to tell you not to tell, not to mention when you did tell, you got so many different kind of criticism, different judgment.
Yes.
But I am so proud of you for, you know, how you shake it off your shoulders, say, you know what, this is my calling, and this is between me and God. And this is not fun, but I have made it to where I am today to do God's work. So I really wanted to thank you again. And, you know, I wanted to share this hope with all of our people that are listening, whether you're going through things now, whether you have been through things, you're a survivor, but you're kind of, you know, deep inside. In fact, I can't praise God enough for how many people, including yourself, like, you know, we cross our paths. Just yesterday, one of my warrior sisters was asking me, do you think I should share my story? So what message would you leave to them? I would like you to share that. And, you know, I would send a message to my warrior sister, and she is sharing already. She's been doing great, but, you know, she's asking like, should I just share with the entire world? And what message would you give to them?
Well, I have been invited to go to Scotland at a prison conference to share my story. I've been to Canada to share at a domestic violence conference. I've been all over the US and the Philippines and Australia and various other countries. So yeah, I mean, we can't keep what we get, what we receive, we need to give back. We need to heal first, grieve, move forward, and have closure. So for me, I'm no longer victim. I am a victorious survivor. And you're right, my husband is 100% behind me now. It took him a long time, and it took me a long time to trust. But that's back now. We have worked through it all in spite of others. And he is, I mean, I couldn't run the computer. I had to ask him to come upstairs and do it for me again. And yeah, we've been married 55 years.
Wow.
I'm living my childhood, you know, little children life. And I love it. I love the purpose that God's given both of us. He's the engineer behind me. He was a field engineer, and he's retired. When he retired, I wrote my book. So then I became full-time working. And I think I've got 3 podcasts this week alone. So I am so blessed that there's so many people that want my story, because I want it to go up, 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 higher and higher. I want people to know that there is hope in the midst of darkness. You only have to light a little candle. I used to sing, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine," all over the world. So if we have the light in us, we need to let it shine. And there's a song that I learned in our African American church. My mama prayed for me, had me on her mind, took the time to pray for me. I'm so glad she prayed. So glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed for me. And then it goes on, my papa prayed for me, and then Jesus prayed for me, and the deacons prayed for me. So I had my mother behind me praying when she didn't know anything. She didn't know what I'd gone through. I couldn't tell her. Post-traumatic stress kept it wrapped up, but it was in God's timing for it all to come out. And we had 4 precious years together. She read my book before God took her home 9 years ago, or 10 years ago, and my father 9 years ago, and they're in heaven together. They were married 71 years. And I had closure with my mother. She was ecstatic when she read my book. And she read it all. And God healed her as a result of his healing in me.
Amen. And thanks to
Yes.
your great work, like you said, from victim to victorious survivor, this is who you truly are, and the hope and the gospel that you are bringing to the world. Thank you again so much, Barbara, for what you do. I can't begin to say enough thank you for the hard work. I know that, I do this work all day long myself, and I know you do get burned out. So for the people like yourself who are advocates, who does this work all day long, they ask me this question. So I'm going to turn around and ask you how, it's very toxic. We have to face that.
Yeah.
We deal with people that, either they're going through things that we need to comfort them, but
Yeah.
also the PTSD, as you mentioned, it never goes away. So you have to cope with that. To the people that looking for a way to sort of, break the silence, and those people, and not to mention, I hate to refer to them as criminals, the perpetrators and the people that we're dealing with. How do you deal with, what self-care would you recommend to advocates and activists like us?
I have to get my rest. So every night I go upstairs, get my jammies on, get comfortable. I read. I do a lot of reading. I might watch a silly show like The Bachelor, but I do a lot of reading. I also have a beautiful flower garden. That is where I get my peace and sanctuary. I love flowers. And like on my book cover, God woke me up 3 nights in a row with my book cover. And I realized I had to have the flower on my book cover because that's me, blossoming and blooming. So the flowers give me, I love getting my hands in the dirt and planting. So that's my piece. Now, somebody else's piece might be different, but I also like to cook, and my husband likes to eat. So that is, with the COVID, that's part of my healing, I suppose, too. And we go out to eat once in a while, but my piece is really my sanctuary, is my gardening, and the butterflies coming on the butterfly bushes. I see one in your background, the butterfly on your wall.
Absolutely.
So that's my, yeah.
Absolutely. So, you talked about Cocoon earlier on, and
Yeah.
I meant to ask you, tell our viewers, for those who does not understand about the meaning of butterfly, the cocoon.
Well, a cocoon is the moth-like creature inside of it, and he spins and spins this web around. And then, to me, it was like sleeping like Rip Van Winkle, or Humpty Dumpty being on the wall falling off. I couldn't tell. Post-traumatic stress kept it under wraps, and like amnesia. And when the butterfly finally breaks out of this cocoon and uses its wings to fly, oh, they're so pretty. I have one that I took on my butterfly bush that's yellow and black. It's a monarch butterfly, and it is so beautiful. And I took a picture of it, and I'm not a photographer. My husband is. There's pictures in my book. It's beautifully illustrated, by the way. And my artist son illustrated some of the illustrations in my book and the cover of my book. And when the butterfly comes out, you're free. You can fly. You can use those wings. You can help others, but you have to come out of the cocoon, and you have to come out of being dead man walking or dead woman walking. When Jesus asked Lazarus, who was dead for 4 days, to come out of the tomb, what did he tell the people? He said, loose him and let him go. Well, we need somebody like you and me to take those stinking bandages off of us, take them off and say, loose her and let her go. So I've been loosed. You've been loosed. I can tell. When you see somebody that's shut down and locked up in their soul damage, their eyes show it all. They can't talk. They can't speak about it. I go to Walmart, and I've been blessed to have a manager at Walmart. I don't know if she's a survivor, but in the summer and spring, I go there and I sell books. I sit outside with my NASCA sign, National Abuse Survivors, and my domestic violence can. And if people drop a $20 bill in the can, I give them a book. And sometimes they don't want one. They say, give it to somebody. I have cross-dressers and gays and lesbians and trans come to me. Those are the ones that Jesus ministered to. He went into the pubs and the bars and the crack houses and rescued them. And that's not to say we all need to do that, but that's where God's led me down that path. And it was a dark path I was on when I was on that path, but I believe he allowed me to enter their world and see a little bit of their world and have them see a little bit of mine. And, let go and let God and heal me and let them go, and then help my husband get healed as well. So there's nothing we can't discuss, and nothing we can't talk about. And we read the New International Recovery Devotional Bible. It's an AA-based Bible, the best Bible I ever got by Zondervan. It's called NIV Recovery Devotional Bible. And that has steps and recovery information in it and how to heal. And that Bible and my support group that I teach, and also having closure with forgiving the clergy, and having that tremendous experience when I heard that he fell down the stairs and broke his back and died. I was just as shocked as the clergy were in the room with me that happened. But I believe God allowed that. He allowed me to face him before he died. Now, I can't be his judge or jury. That's up to God. He had a 7-week window to get right with God. Whether he did or not, that's on him.
Yeah, I really believe that happened for a reason, that, at that particular time that you were meant to meet him and give him an opportunity to repent. And,
Right.
I'm this is really between him and God, like you said, but I feel, having experienced, like you were saying, like you can see from my eyes and the passion that I wanted to do, and then I have to bring hope to people. Yes, I'm a survivor myself, so I can feel that, even though I haven't looked at him in his eyes and everything, but the words that he said, he truly repented. That's
Yes,
how I
yeah.
feel. So
Yes.
I despite the bad things, that unfortunate things that have happened to you, I'm really glad that it was able to have a closure for the both of you. So
Amen.
yes, thank you so much. Wow, this is This is, an hour packed with so much information and your story, but most importantly, the light, the hope at the end of the tunnel. And thank you so much, Barbara. We're going to put your book link at the content section below so that our audience can reach out to you and purchase the book and support the beautiful work that you do. Yes. And this is the link, and we're going to put that at the comment section below. Now, before we close, do you have anything takeaway that you would like to add?
I just want to thank you first for having me come on the show. I am so honored to meet you and be a warrior sister with you. We will continue to get in touch with one another. And I just want to tell people that if they've gone through any kind of tragedies at all, please don't give up. Don't give up the ship, let's say, because Jesus is in the boat with you. He might be sleeping in the boat, but he's there, and he walks on water, and he will take your hand and remove you from shame. He died on the cross for our shame, and I carried it like a wagon up the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there was a higher mountain to climb, and I pulled that heavy duty wagon filled with shame. But when I finally let it go and forgave, and truly forgave from my heart, not from my head, but it went all the way down into my heart, that's when God began to release me from shame.
Thank you. Beautiful. Like you said, victim to victorious survivor. Thank you again so much. We can't wait to have the show premiere, and stay tuned. And for those who are listening in later, this is the Miss Texas Show, where it's a safe platform for survivors, victims, and their supporters to get on the healing journey with hope, love, and unity. Thank you again, Barbara. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you.